This is the contractor sandwich board sign that I made a few years ago and posted the video on YouTube. And the link to that video is in the video description below. It's only about 7 minutes long. You might like that one. But check out the one I'm about to show you right now. So this video also shows you how to make a sandwich board sign, but it is a whole lot simpler. And instead of buying expensive hardware, buying hinges, I'm using simple rope hinges patterned after James Wareham's catamaran designs, where he uses rope lashings to tie the rudders to the hull, and they work very well. They're very effective, so stay tuned. Well, you might be wondering what I'm doing here, and well, I'm making some signs, sandwich board type signs. Now, I did a video on this a few years back on one that I made, which is a little bit more complicated, sturdier. This is a little bit different and making it a bit cheaper and quick and dirty. And what I'm doing right now is I'm drilling some holes. These boards here are going to be backing plates for the top of these pieces of plywood, which are going to be the signs. This is AC exterior plywood that I have. It's only 1/2 inch. The A side, or the smooth side, is going to get a few coats of blackboard paint, chalk paint, so that they can be used as a blackboard type sign. These boards here, they're going to back across the top of the back side, and the reason for that is I'm going to drill a series of holes on each end, and instead of using metal hinges and screws, I'm going to use some thin line here, and I'm just going to lash it. Very similar to the way that a James Wareham catamaran, the rudders are lashed to the hulls. And I'll talk more about that later. So what I did is I just made some measurements, and I know where my holes have to go, and you'll get the idea. Now that I have all the holes drilled in these backer boards that go up at the top, you can see that I have the holes drilled here. What I want to do is the top edges that are exposed, and that's where the lashings are gonna overlap that like a hinge, like that. And so I don't want sharp edges, so I'm just going to take my trim router with a round over bit. I think it might be a 1/4 inch round over bit. You can use an 1/8 inch, doesn't matter that much. And I'm just going to round over the two top edges here. The bottom doesn't need to be rounded over. So we'll get that in motion. That gives me a nice soft rounded edge, and I'm going to do the others the same way. I'll be back in a moment. I measured up 2 inches from the bottom, and I drew a line across, and this is just going to mark where I line up the top of the plywood with this top piece. So a little bit of that top piece is sticking out, and what's sticking out is the edge that has the drilled holes in it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw a little bit of wood glue on here. Pretty simple, no big deal. I'm going to put this underneath. I'm going to line up the edge of the plywood with the line that I made. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you do the best you can. And then I'm going to put a few screws in, but just to keep it in place, I'm going to pin it first. Make sure I keep it all lined up. And I'll toss in some screws. These are just 1 inch long. I happen to have them 1 inch long screws. These are number 6s, number 8s might be better. But this is just a simple sign. And it's going to have two sides that look exactly alike, hinged at the top using the twine or the rope. This is like a little nylon cord. This is actually a nylon pull starter cord used on small engines like, you know, chainsaws and that kind of thing. So I'll throw some screws in here for good measure. And this will be better than just having the pins in there. This will help grip it a little bit better. And don't have to get out of control with this. That should be all that's needed. Okay, so one side is done. Now I'm going to do the others the exact same way I just did this. And then when I come back, I'll show you how I put these together. Okay, now time to lash them together. So we'll make one of these sandwich board signs. There's two sides to it. So this is a front face. I'm putting that down. And the other front face is going to face up. And I'll put a spacer in between back here. As you can see, I have my holes here, and I'm going to begin the lashing. Now, I'm not sure how much line I'm going to need. I cut off about maybe 45 inches or so, and I have 6 holes on one side and I have 7 holes on the other. One extra hole because that's where I'm going to begin. And so let me feed that through. And I'm going to put a figure 8 knot in this one end. This is the extra hole. I can trim off the excess later. Got a little bit hanging out there. Now what I want to do, I'm going to come up, I'm going to go over, I'm going to go through this hole, and instead of going straight through, I'm coming over, I'm going through this hinge system here, and then coming up from the bottom. If I can get it through. Oh, wrong hole. Then I'm coming up and I'm going over again. So basically what I'm doing, I'm going back and forth, but every time I come through one of these holes, and I'll cinch this up tighter later, but just to make it easier for me, I'm going to leave it a little bit loose here. But every time I come through, I come outboard and I loop around like so. Do the same thing each time. And I come up and over and down. So I'm always feeding from each side. Every time I feed through, I come out through the hinge, or where it hinges. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but you can see what I'm doing. As that comes through, I'm not going through the bottom one, I'm pulling it out like that. And then to get to the other hole, I'm going around this piece and then up. Now you can see how every other one, how they're spaced apart. And when this is pulled tight, basically you're making a hinge that opens like this and they don't bind. So I'm going to keep doing this. I'll be back in just a moment. Now I'm at the end, and I'm at the point where I only have one more hole, but instead of going around and through like I did before, this is the only one where I'm going to go straight through to the bottom, like so. And then when I can do that, once I do that, I can start tightening things up. So I can start pulling things through, like so. And since I haven't done this before, I was starting to get nervous. I was running out of line. I was thinking maybe I should have got more. I thought I had more than enough, but okay. I can pull that through, and now that's fairly tight. At this point, I can do a couple of granny knots, cut off the end. I'm good to go. I just have to get a match or a flame or something and just melt the ends of that line. It's nylon, so it doesn't unravel. But there's something I want to point out. What I did, I made a hinge where these two parts are side by side. This is not the way that James Wareham lashes his rudders on. The lacing pattern is about the same, but he has a rudder that's going edge to edge. The edge of the rudder going to the edge of the hull that has a little ridge sticking out. So it's just edge to edge because the rudder moves back and forth, like so. So his will look a little bit differently if you look his up. You look up his images and so forth on the internet. There's all kinds of examples. But I just wanted to know that I wanted you to know that this is different. The lacing pattern is very similar, but it is a little different. But this only hinges a little bit. It only opens a little like this. It's just a sandwich sign, that's all. Not a big deal. I'll just tie this knot here. I'll be good, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing on this end. I'll take another piece of line, feed it through the same way I did this, tie a knot, and my sandwich sign is done, unless I want to put a little piece of line between the two to keep it from opening too far. That'll limit the opening it can make. I might do that, might not. It's not a requirement, but it's going to be, like I said, this is going to be chalkboard on both sides, so they can erase it in whatever signs they want, and there'll be two of them, all total. But I'll be back in a little bit. Now I have the other end laced up, and what I want to do here is I'm just going to put a couple of granny knots on the end. Now there are some other knots you can use that are kind of fancy. If you're a fellow sailor, I know that you know what they are, but we don't want to get everybody all upset and in a tether here. We don't need to know any fancy knots. Just the average homeowner wants to build a couple of signs, maybe they have a yard sale, they want to reuse them or whatever. This is fine. A couple of granny knots, one on top of the other. That'll stay together, especially when you put a little heat to it and you melt the end. You'll be fine. And that's all there is to that. We'll get that tight. I'm going to cut this. And I'll put the heat to it in a little bit. I just have to do the other end, the first one that I did. I just have to tie the granny knots on that. And I'll be back in a moment. Well, I decided not to put the rope between them. That's something anybody can add if they want. They might not want them. And these are pretty simple. You can see it hinges pretty well. It folds up. And there's not much to it. It's pretty inexpensive to make. I think these rope hinges work really well. You don't have to spend money on hardware. And the other thing is that when you do spend money on hinges, you know, they come with these funky little screws. They're wimpy little hinges. They fall apart. The screws pull out. More trouble than what it's worth. Drill a few holes, get a piece of line. Works just fine. And if the line ever, well, it's not like this is working back and forth, it's just sitting. But if the line were to ever to rot or break, another piece of line would cost you next to nothing. And it's easy to replace.